Hello and welcome to Furious Driving, and today I'm at the wheel of something, well, a bit curious, a bit rare, certainly a bit unusual in this country. Only 10% of them were sold in this format new, and there's very few left. Probably only one of this exact model in this country, which makes it unicorn. I like unicorns, and if you like unicorns as well, then please hit subscribe because that's what this channel does best. Now, a quick word to pay the bills, and on with the review.
Furious Driving, proud to be supported by Diamond Bright, protecting, cleaning and caring for the Furious fleet and for yours with 10% off using code FD10. Follow the links in the description below.
Hello and welcome to Furious Driving, and today we're looking at yet another insanely rare car because this is a 1979 Opel Kadett, a car they only made 1.7 million of in Western Germany alone, and so naturally this is astonishingly rare. Bear with me, it actually is. So the Kadett C, it came about as part of GM's World Car programme, the T car they called it. This wider programme also gave us the K car. So here in Britain, the Vauxhall Cavalier in the 1980s was part of that. Now, back to this. The T car was all over the world. Think of a country, they sold it there. They might have built it there as well. It went everywhere. And it looks incredibly modern and sharp for 1973 when it came out, ran through to 1979, 6 years in production. But underneath, it's actually surprisingly basic. It is GM's last compact rear-wheel drive platform after all. So here in Britain, this is better known as the Vauxhall Chevette, of course, but it came with a pointy front end, so it looks completely different as it approaches you, and with a different tail end as well. And also, it was known as the Chevy Chevette over in Brazil. This car got everywhere. The bulk of cars produced in Germany were for Western Europe, but mainly for export. 52% left Germany, went around the rest of Europe. However, most of those were the two-door saloon, or limousine as they called it. About 62% of cars built were that. There was also a four-door saloon, which was less popular at the time because the two-door was seen as, well, just a bit more classy. And then of course there was the estate, the caravan as they called it. That accounted for yet more sales. Coming in with only 10% of sales was this, the Coupe. It was a very attractive car. It's like a miniature version of the Opel Manta, and dealers at the time would actually say that the couples would come in and the husband would buy a Manta, the wife would buy the smaller Kadett Coupe. But that didn't mean you were being shortchanged because it was still a really nice car. And from the mid-70s you could have it as a GTE with a 2-litre engine. This is only a 1.2, but it still comes with lots of cool touches. For example, the must-have item of the 70s, the road-style wheels, and this is one of the coolest little features you'll ever see. Both sides are unflustered, unbothered by having to have a fuel filler cap because it's here, tucked underneath this fake vent, which is a great idea. Keeps the lines clean and smooth. Manufacturers should do more of that kind of thing. Now, the Vauxhall Chevette, built just up the road in Luton for the British market, obviously in far smaller numbers, but had one crucial change to the Opel versions of the car, and that was the tail end. Obviously the panel work was a little bit different, but most crucially, this is only a saloon boot. However, the Vauxhall was a hatchback, and that was something the Opel never got. So you do still get a good sized boot, but it's harder to get things into than the hatchback, and it only goes back as far as the bulkhead just here. You do, however, get a lovely full-size Ross-style wheel, which is a very nice thing to have as a bonus. You don't even get a spare wheel at all these days. This one, spare Ross-style. How cool is that? The thinking at the time was that the safest place for the fuel tank was behind the rear seats and above the axle, and so that's where this car has got it. Of course, it moved in the estate car version. Rover and Mercedes pushed that idea first of all, I think with the P6 and then the W123, as being the safest places between the rear wheels. Later thinking moved it slightly further under the car. So under the bonnet, no matter what variant you got a 4-cylinder petrol. That was the law basically, but most of them though, out of the 5 options you could have had, came with this, the 1.2. It's the only unit that ran from 73 to 79 right the way through, and it accounted for 82% of sales, or 1.38 million of them. So I imagine there's still a few in scrapyards around the place. It's a peppy little thing. It makes 59 horsepower, although there was a 51 bhp detuned version for some models. And from 1974 they brought out the 1 litre, which had originally been intended for the Mediterranean markets where their pretty punitive tax laws hit anything with a bigger engine. But when the oil crisis hit, end of 73, they decided to release it to the rest of the world. Some people bought it, but to be honest, there wasn't a big difference in running costs and MPG over the 1.2 because it's working harder. So the 1.2 was the one to have. Little single carb under there, and this is my favourite part of the whole deal. This mad throttle linkage just here. which I imagine must have been replicated over here on the left-hand side on left-hand drive cars, because the carburettor is smack dab in the middle. And unlike Volkswagen with the Mark 1 Golf and Polo, they've left lots of room on both sides, so you can have power brakes. The servo fits quite happily in front of the driver, whichever side of the white line he's sitting. I was wrong, I found a new favourite thing, and that is the bonnet prop retention system, because normally it's just a little plastic clip or something which breaks off really easily. Obviously we've got the little clip here to put it into, but in the centre we've got this little raised lump with a groove in it, so you put it in there and that forces it to be sprung loaded, so it clips into there and stays put. What a great idea! Simple but so effective. So as I say, lots of nice detailing on the side of the car. We've got the pop-out side rear windows, lots of this satiny metal work around the edge. We've got the bumper strips alongside as well. And check out this lovely detail here in the door handles. Although it's marketed against things like the Escort, it does have a step-up feel about it in a way. So we've got body-coloured metalwork, of course, it's the 1970s after all, but we've got a big vinyl panel, lots of pressed detail, we've got the satin strips again, little square, tiny, it's a little slightly bit flimsy door handle, a solid door pull armrest, and of course manual windows because, well, it's Europe in the 70s. Stepping inside, check out the pinstripe seats, these mean business. Quite comfortable, quite supportive, quite buckety, and most importantly, they've got headrests. Headrests on a, well, not base model, but you know, a lowly family coupe saloon in 70, well, any time in the 70s, was quite a thing to write home about. They do flip forward. There's not a great deal of space in the back when the seats are pushed far enough back for someone my size, but they're good sized seats, and they've even got armrests built into the edge with built-in ashtrays, because the 70s again. Push the seats forward and you can probably get people in there comfortably. Stepping further aboard, you can see this being the inspiration for Hot Black Ducatio's black spaceship in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, because there's not a lot of colour in here. Little satin strip across the bottom of the dashboard. The T-shelf, I'm going to say, is woeful. This is very, very poor showing indeed from the Germans on this one. We have got air vents for the windscreen, we've got texture. This I assume is a grille for a radio, which we don't have. But yeah, no room for a cup of tea to balance on there. And with curious little eyeball vents as well, which rotate in like that, but don't rotate the other way, so you can't control the air fully. Meanwhile, on the left-hand side, we have got a substantial sub-T-shelf, not a glove box, just a shelf area to store things. Blanking plate instead of a radio would have been an option. Big ashtray, naturally standard. We do have a lighter. Check out the artwork on that. That's a pretty nice bit of graphics on there, showing flame rather than smoking, which is quite a nice touch. Here it looks like it's going to be a USB, but it's actually the rear screen heater on our 2-speed fan, and our other heater controls just there. And underneath that, quite a, again, a luxury item for the 70s. We've got a centre console tray, because so often in the 70s you just have the gear shift sprouting out and nothing else. But we have got a big oddment tray just there, perfect. Get an iPhone Max in that, they really are planning ahead. iPhone Max and a Snickers. This car has got the optional automatic, not a common option at all, but this one does have it. Now moving up to the driver's area, we've got a very compact but full little area of instrumentation. We've got the speedometer going up to 120 mph, only showing 81,892 miles in the car, which is absolutely nothing. I think it's only done about 1,000 miles in the last 10 years. A clock, an actual quartz clock, temperature and fuel, or tank it says, temp and tank, I like that. A couple of warning lights, and that's your lot. Choke is down here, hidden on the left hand side, and our light switch, very Vauxhall-y, is down here on the right. I should say very Opel GM. The steering wheel is sort of hard but slightly squishy rubber, which is good for crash protection. We only have one stalk though, and that's indicators and wipers and washers all in one unit. Now of course we need to do the horn test. Whoa, that's a bassy part, that's got some gravitas. Opel was always considered a bit more luxurious than Ford or Vauxhall, so you can see where that pop is coming from. Now moving upstairs, we have got a little courtesy light, and we've got that lovely kind of stippled vinyl that so many cars of the 70s had. We also have 4 grab handles, so this is, you know, in 70s terms, very luxurious. All the toys are here. Now, get me out on the road and see what it's like to drive. This was the first Kadett version to have 3-point seat belts fitted, a big safety upgrade over the previous generations. I love the big light up choke as well. You really can't miss that when it's time to push that in. Now 59 horsepower, but a very light car. And a 3-speed automatic. This is the GM Turbo Hydromatic 180. It does kick down. It does feel like it's sucking a lot of power out of the car though. Standard issue on the car was a 4-speed all synchro mesh manual. And later on some of the more high spec versions, you could pick a 5-speed all synchro mesh manual as an option. You could spec this car incredibly well because, well, basically it was thought of as, well, more posh than the Vauxhall equivalent. It comes from that curious time, put the window up, it's hot, but you need to hear me. It comes from that curious time when Vauxhall and Opel were selling rival cars which were basically the same side by side in dealers around the UK and in Europe as well, so a bizarre situation for competition. So back to some of the spec. When the car came out, the base models were only issued with all-wheel, unpower assisted drums on all 4 corners. You could have front discs and or a servo as an option up until 1975 when they decided to make everyone be allowed to live, basically. Oh, it is fairly basic layout of a longitudinal engine in the front, rear-wheel drive, all that kind of thing. It does have pretty clever suspension. It's got double wishbones with coils at the front, so it does actually, obviously rolls like a 70s car, but it, you know, grips and corners quite nicely considering. Now I mentioned at the beginning these cars are rare. This car was one of the 10% that were coupes. In the UK today, there are 10 Kadetts showing up as registered. If that 10% holds true, that means it's the only one. It's a unicorn, which is pretty amazing, frankly, isn't it? Right, nice over the speed bumps. And this particular car does have a pretty incredible story. It was sold new from an Opel dealer down in Bath. And 20-something years later, that owner came back to trade the car in, back to the same dealership after all those years, where I think it had been serviced as well. And seeing what a rarity was, the dealer principal decided he would have it for himself. So he bought it from the previous owner and kept it for 30 years. He took it back into this dealership's body shop, had a complete restoration on the thing, but barely did any miles every year. It would go back to the dealership for a service and MOT every year, and then back to his heated garage. So about 1,000 miles over the last couple of decades. But it was preserved. Now I mentioned that these were sold and built all around the world. It was GM's world car after all. It was developed in conjunction with Isuzu, who then built it for the Japanese market. They also built it for Buick in America as well, bizarrely. In Australia, it was built by Holden, and in Korea, it was built by Daewoo, where initially it was known as the Seihan Gemini, but then after a little while the name was changed to the Daewoo Mixi, which is cute. Of course, also Vauxhall sold it as the Chevette, and in Argentina, bizarrely, it came out 6 months before any of the other brands, where of course it was sold as a Chevy, as I mentioned earlier. It rides really, really smoothly. The chassis is, well, just very comfortable. And in driving position, I've got a ton of space. A little bit tight on my elbow, but that's fairly standard for a 70s car because they were so much narrower. It was 20mm wider than the Kadett B, believe it or not. You might have noticed I've only got one wing mirror on my side, nothing on the passenger side. But what does the passenger need to see anyway? That's crazy talk. I've got loads of headroom as well. And from a driving point of view, I've got lots of legroom. It's a top hinged accelerator pedal, and it does mean that with my sort of fairly long feet, I do sometimes get caught on the bar it hangs from. It means I can't push the accelerator all the way down, but you kind of get used to work around that. 40 miles an hour feels like it's happy spot, to be fair. But as I say, 59 horsepower, 1.2, that's about right really, isn't it? Of course, later on, the Kadett and the Chevette lines merged and became the Astra ultimately across all the markets. But this is a curious period when you could have that bizarre internal rivalry with selling the same product with a different badge on the front. Okay, it still happens now, Kia and Hyundai for example, but they were just so similar then. So where are all the Kadetts now? Well, they are still pretty popular. There's a lot of them around in Europe specifically. Because we had the Chevette here, there's quite a lot more Chevettes than there are Kadetts. They're a bigger seller by quite a large margin. However, if you've seen Ian Cook from Pop Band Colour, he is restoring a Chevette. And that was rusty! And that is what befell so many 1970s cars. They just rusted away to nothing. Which is a shame because there was some really cool metal. Now, there are a few very distinctive Vauxhall, Opel, GM styling cues that make the car stand out as a product of this particular brand. For example, the little crease down the centre of the bonnet, but the headlights especially just really put me in mind of a Mark I Fiesta. Certain generational styling cues are also present in the design as well. If you enjoyed this episode, please do like and of course subscribe. Thank you for watching and join us again next time driving something completely different.